Hello. Hi, friends. It's cold outside. Nobody told me that was going to be a thing. Right now it is -40 in Minneapolis, so it's only -2 here, which is good, because in the US, -2 is like 30, which is balmy. It's quite nice. My name is Scott Hanselman. You can go out there and Google with Bing for Scott and learn all about me. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I did bring way more hardware than I should have, and I didn't warn the people here. I usually figured I would show up with one laptop, and then I brought a laptop and another laptop, and then 2 other computers and 3 other computers. So I was originally going to do like this all slides thing, because somebody told me when you do a keynote, it has to be all slides with evocative stock photography. So I don't want to do any of that. Instead, I'm going to do a bunch of demos with daily builds of software where I did a git pull while walking here. Okay? So lower your expectations. I think if we just want to agree as a group that if it compiles, that's a success of its own, right? So I don't want to hear any of these tweets, these passive-aggressive, well, I guess the demo gods didn't bless Scott today. If it compiled, I think we can all just pat me on the back and say, great job, Scott. Okay? Even if it compiles with warnings, right? Because sometimes I've seen people like, well, compile with warnings, but that whole, var should be an explicit declaration. That, that's a little iffy. I have a podcast. This is the advertising portion of the show. Does anyone who knows who I am or followed me online, just this moment, as I said, I have a podcast, learn that I have a podcast? A couple people? OK, awesome. This is great. I have a podcast. Talk to you, sir. I have done 675 episodes of this podcast over 13 years, every single Thursday. In fact, episode 666, I talked to someone who analyzed the source code of Doom and wrote a book about it. It took me the podcast of the beast in order to actually make that happen. I waited and held on to that podcast for many, many years. I would encourage you to check it out. It's got a lot of fresh faces. It's called Hansel Minutes, because I'm a really bad estimator. People say, how many minutes will that take? And I'll go, about 30 minutes. And they'll go, is that Hansel minutes or actual minutes? Which is a really mean way of saying that a Hansel minute is about an hour. I do work at the Microsoft on the forest moon of Endor. But I work in open source, which is great. And since there's no Darth Vader anymore, it's just basically a bunch of stormtroopers trying not to blow up another planet. Of course, I went there to do open source, and people said I was a sellout, and that hurt my feelings, but I've worked through it. I've found a way in myself, totally internally, to understand that it's OK to work at Microsoft. This is me before Microsoft. I'm the one on the left there. And then this is me after Microsoft. So it's been a lovely, lovely ride. All right, so .NET was open sourced, you may have heard. We open sourced .NET in 2001. You know that we've actually, do you know that that's a real thing? This is not like fake news, it's real. We open sourced it, we just did a really bad job of it. It wasn't open source, it was source opened. It was like we zipped it up, we pulled out all the good stuff, and we said the rest of it is left as an exercise to the reader. We took out the jitter and the garbage collector and basically anything interesting or patentable or anything we could charge money for. And we made this zip file, and we called it Rotor, R-O-T-O-R, and we thought that we would put that out into the community, except some things didn't exist at the time. What didn't exist? Git, GitHub, social media beyond, I don't know, mailing lists and emailing diff files and patch files. Real social media. Also, the organizational willpower to do good was failing at the time. So we continued to try to open source things. And we really got it right when we released what I like to call .NET on Nails, which was in no way a reaction to Ruby on Rails handing our asses to us. Totally unrelated that we would release an MVC framework when the rise of another MVC framework was happening. That's totally, by the way, what we did. We needed an answer to Rails. No, seriously, though, this was open source. And it was open sourced in order to try to fool the lawyers into saying yes by default, because they would say no to basically anything we would ask for. So we'd just slowly move the line a little bit. Like there was a rule that said you could release a sample without talking to a lawyer if it was less than 100 lines. But like Hello World and C# is like 98 lines, so you couldn't really release a useful sample, especially if you put all of your curly braces on a different line. So we would just do everything on one long line, one long link statement, and that was the sample. And we couldn't change that rule, but we could change the number of lines, so we changed it to 1,000 lines. And we would just slowly ask forgiveness, because asking permission was really hard. And now we're in a really cool situation where Microsoft is doing everything open by default, and we actually have meetings about whether or not we should not open source something. And basically everything's been open source. So fast forward, and now everything's open source all the way down to the metal, to the compiler. And I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff that we've been doing, but also a bunch of stuff the community's been doing. I've got some exciting things that you would not expect to be able to do in .NET that make me very happy. Now, right now, about 60% of the contributions are coming from outside of Microsoft. Google and Samsung are huge contributors to .NET, so more people are working on .NET outside Microsoft than are inside, which is a good thing. Here's a cool map that marketing gave me with some blobs. That's 2015 blobs, that's 2016 blobs. 2018 is really exciting because we finally obliterated New Zealand, which was a personal goal of mine. And this shows that we have .NET contributions from everywhere, including a boat. There's a person on a boat right there. They're either on a boat or they're at 0,0. But either way, I don't mind, because they offered a good contribution and we merged it, so it doesn't really matter. Now, Microsoft named this thing .NET, which I always thought was a little bit audacious. Like, we just co-opted an entire top-level domain, like completely obliterating my whole .org strategy that I was trying to do as a person. But who would have the audacity to do something, to name something .NET, or to like name something just a simple noun, to make an editor and call it code, and think that that was OK? And still we did it, and I think that's awesome. But .NET in the past has been a thing that we're kind of afraid of. It's a thing that is installed on Windows, and if it's not installed on Windows, the only reason that you really would install it would be because you want to run paint.net. All right, so it's like, oh, I got to run paint. Oh, shoot, I got to install .NET, and then I got to get paint.net. But what happens with .NET right now, because it's slowed down, .NET 4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.7.1.2, 1.8.6, September refresh, is it's a fundamental part of Windows. .NET has become an engine of Windows. And what happens is someone will go and write some code in like .NET 4.0, and it'll work great. Let's say this gentleman writes an app, and it's amazing, and he puts it on IIS. It's like an expense reporting app, and it's stable, and he likes it, and it works. And then this young lady comes to work at the company, and she does .NET 4.8.2 because it uses C#8, and she wants to use the new hotness, and she's excited about this great new world of .NET. She writes an app, it works great on her machine, and then she goes over to IT and says, can I install 4.8.2 on the server? And he's like, oh, no. Why not? Well, because I don't want to piss it off. Like, I don't want to anger the thing. Like, there's a reboot, and it might not work. And then she quits her job in anger, becomes a Node developer, and then it falls into a pit of Node modules and never gets out, and it's a whole thing. But that's another talk. The point is, we didn't set either of you up for success because you want a stable, reliable thing that you don't have to update every 20 minutes with patches that is reliable. And you want the latest stuff. You want to be able to do new language features and see innovation. So you got to balance these two .NETs, .NETs plural. All the while, someone is creating another .NET, Mono. Mono is a clean room re-implementation of .NET. Clean room re-implementation. That means that they wrote another .NET without looking at the source because they were afraid of patents, because we were doing all kinds of crazy patent stuff we shouldn't have been doing. And they were like, well, we'll make a .NET that's shaped like .NET, it looks like .NET, it quacks like .NET, but we won't read the source. And then what they would do is they'd say, all right, let's look at the shape of a string. What does a string have? It's got system, dot contains and dot length and dot compare to. It's got all stringy stuff. And if I said, hey, go write me a string, don't look at the source, Here's the interface. You would do that, and your string would be different than my string. You'd probably use the same techniques. But if the tests passed, we'd have 2 complete implementations of string. That'd be cool, right? And then we bought them, and then now they became Xamarin, and they have a bunch of stuff, though, that the other .NETs don't have. Like, these are 3 different .NETs, one on Windows, one that is .NET Core, which runs on Linux, or a dozen different Linuxes. And then you've got Mono, which enables things like iOS and Android. And that's really interesting. But it isn't a bad thing. It isn't like, oh, man, we got 3 .NETs. This sucks. There's stuff happening in Mono, like ahead-of-time compilation. There's stuff happening around interpretation and being able to interpret IL or C# that compiles to IL. And then there's jitter that's being worked on the .NET Framework side, like 64-bit massively parallel jitters on modern processors. So we have 3 .NETs that are all innovating in cool ways. What we really need is to combine all of that work and make all the .NETs better, but also justify the existence of why there would need to be 3. Now, it's worth pointing out that the .NET Framework and .NET Core compile with Visual Studio, and they think about Visual Studio and C and C++ in an idiomatically Visual Studio place. They're not super portable. They're pretty portable. .NET Core is quite portable. It compiles well on Linux. People have compiled it for ARM. People have compiled it for different processors. But Mono is really well thought of as a piece of portable C code. It's a piece of code where you can git clone, apt-get, build essentials, configure, and make. It's extraordinarily clean. You can work with Mono on a Nintendo Wii. It powers Unity. You can make games for a Switch. There's value in that clean, portable C code. .NET Core, a huge amount of perf work has been done to make that as fast as possible. And we're actually bumping up against the laws of physics itself as we saturate gigabit pipes and 10 gigabit pipes with 7, 8 million requests a second. If you go and look at the Tech Empower benchmarks, there's about 10 or 11 frameworks that are all clustered at the top, and they all asymptotically approach 8 million requests a second, because that's just simply how many bytes you can get into a pipe. So there's a lot of fun happening in the benchmarking space as we do a little bit of a thumb war, not a competition, but a co-opetition with all the different frameworks to see how we can, do micro benchmarks. Now, a micro benchmark isn't a good enough reason to use one framework over another, but it's super fun. And it also shows that the perf work that we're doing in .NET Core is really cool, because it's about 10 to 11 times faster than Node in real tight loops, which is cool. OK? That's the end of the slides. Let's go into the PowerShell prompt here. And let's go out to the desktop, and we'll make a folder here. And there's nothing in this folder, because I didn't go into that folder. There's nothing in this folder. There we go. Cool. I'm going to go back and forth between too big and too small, because reasons. OK. Now, if I say where, so if you would all just look away. You ever have that situation where, because here's the thing. I type like 100 words a minute, but like 90 are backspace. And you know how you're just like typing as fast as your brain can type, and then your coworker is like looking over and you're like, and then suddenly your hands are all covered in like Novocaine, like you just went to the dentist and you're trying to type? That's me. So if you would all just avert your eyes, because I don't even know what I was trying to type there, and I've only had 2 breakfasts today, so I don't know what's happening. If I type where.net, you can see the .net is in C, program files, .net.exe. That's not C:\Windows. That's not something to be afraid of. And if I actually go down into program files, .net, and poke around in there, I've got a bunch of .nets. I've got a bunch of .nets down in there. They're all side by side, and I can pin .nets to different folders. That means that if I type .NET -- version here, I might get one version. But if I go into another folder and I type .NET -- version, I might get another. So I can rest assured that I'll get the version that I expect, especially if I hand it out to someone, so I can pin that down. It's all built in, which is cool, even though it's all coming from that same location. OK, now, I'm going to do things at the command line because I'm non-denominational when it comes to IDEs. You should use whatever IDE makes you happy. You should use Project Writer from JetBrains, or Visual Studio Code, or Visual Studio for the Mac, or Emacs, or Vim. And if you use Vim on Windows, Windows 10 reboots faster than ever, so exiting Vim is way easier. You just reboot, and you can be back and working in just like a minute. It's really great. I'm going to say .NET New Console, and we're going to call it LondonCon. And we'll go into that folder, and I'll say LondonCon. We'll say .NET Run. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. Microsoft sucks. That's basically the kind of the process is you download .NET, and then you declare that we suck because that took 3 seconds, and then you compare us to Go or Node or Python or whatever, and you go, that sucks. But if we go, I don't know. See, every time, sometimes I type the wrong thing multiple times. Like for a while, I was typing docket instead of Docker. So I just made a batch file called docket.bat. That was just you gotta smooth the speed bumps. So if I say .NET build, and we can see that there's a .NET DLL right there, and if I say .NET that DLL, see now it's fast, because run implies a restore of the packages and a build and then a run. So there is a lot of speed there, and I can prove it by doing a formal benchmark. Right? So then I can move that to the cloud, and I've got like cloud-enabled, containerized, Kubernetes, hello world in the cloud at scale. Right? No, the cool part, though, is that that's super fast, but that DLL is sitting right there. Let's open that up. Let's go out to the developer command prompt, and let's type ildasm, which is the name of my mixtape, and also a tool that is built into .NET. This is a pretty fancy new UI, Windows 11 preview of the high-quality Metro interface that the kids are using. Look at those icons. Somebody painted that. Like, I don't know if that person's dead or what's going on. And I can look in here, and we see the intermediate language. So we just compiled C# to the intermediate language. C# is apples, and running it is apple juice. This is applesauce. What's great about applesauce, and what's a little bit weird about it, is F# is oranges, but it compiles to applesauce. Same thing with VB and all the other languages, right? The fruit that they ending up being is this pre-chewed applesauce. And if we look at that, we can read this. I'm sure we've all been trained to read IL from birth, right? Line 1, nop. Don't know what that does. Line 2, lurdster. And then call. So we load a string into the stack, and we say call system.console.writeLine. Who does the actual writing of the string to the screen? The operating system, right? There's nothing there about the implementation of system.console, because that's coming from a library. What's interesting about that is that we all sometimes forget what's underneath, what's one layer down in the call stack. We get so used to working on what we think is the metal. Right? The young people today think the metal is F12 tools in Chrome. I'm working on the metal, low-level code, man. Right? In a virtual machine inside of a larger process, inside of 15 Chrome processes on top of Windows, which is running in a virtual machine on an Ubuntu machine, and it just turtles all the way down. This is .NET's metal, and we fool ourselves sometimes thinking that that's low level. But ultimately, it's going to call Windows or Linux or Mac for that console.writeLine. And that's really important to remember when we think about portability. Now, I made this in .NET Core, but what if I did this? And I opened up Mono and picked a reasonable font, and then thought again and picked a reasonable font size, and then typed Mono and that DLL. This simple demonstration, this idea that an executable, or in this case a DLL with an entry point, can be run on .NET Core or on Windows, .NET, or on Mono, is a testament to the power of that standard that ECMA standard, that standard of this applesauce that we're all speaking. Mono doesn't know that that's from .NET Core. Mono doesn't really care. So that's super interesting. That makes me wonder, like, how truly portable is that stuff? Well, it's portable until it hits some low-level system call, or C code, some Win32 or Linux shared object or something that's platform-specific, right? If I wrote some code and I said hello world this and hello world that and wrote a bunch of for loops and did some HTTP calls and then said open the registry, it would all work until the open the registry part if the registry didn't exist on that platform. And then I can go and think about how I want to write my code and make it more portable. Now if I go over here to London Con, I'll go back up, and I want to say .NET new. Now, I've been saying class lib, and I said that, and Damian Edwards and David Fowler recoiled in horror. I don't have a GIF of it, but it was a lot like, and there was an implied, do you say class lib? Is it a lib? Do you get books at the library? Is this going to be the whole GIF thing again? Because what's happening is now 1,000 people have just said, no, it's lib, right? No, it's not. It's lib. It's library. So I hope you're not offended. Keep in mind that David Fowler is also one of the people who tried to make NuGet packages nupkegs. So his decisions are not considered to be valid. So I will go down here to this file that we will not speak its name. Someone remember this here. We'll say greetings, public static, string, hello, and then we'll say return, I don't know, hello NDC. Hell NDC, yeah, that's probably better. All right. And now, if I was really trying to be like a gatekeeper, which is a bad thing, I would probably say copy con foo.cs, and then I do it all at the command line like this, because you only get one chance if you do it like this, and then you go like this, and then you say Control Z, and it copies, and then people wonder what a con is and where we're copying from it and what just happened. This is text editors for like YOLO people. It's write only, one line at a time. Con is actually the console. All right, so let's go here, and I'm going to go back up to that London Con, and I'm going to do the command line equivalent of right-click references add project, because I want the console to reference the library. Cool. So .NET, .next, .NET, .NET add reference, .London lib star.csproj. So I've added a reference to that, and I can open up that csproj file. I don't know what I'm doing, and you can see that it's added that reference. So there's XML there, but you can avert your eyes and just pretend it's not, right? Because I know that the kids are not doing angle brackets now because curly braces and mustaches are way cooler. But then just as I learned curly braces, now it's YAML, which is just Whitespace. And I've actually had like full systems in production in Kubernetes go down because of a misplaced tab. But it's still way better, right? Everyone agrees it's way better? It's not like we needed validation or maybe a schema or anything like that. I'm not saying SOAP was a good thing, but I'm just saying I built some stuff and it's still running on SOAP. That's all I'm saying. But enjoy your Whitespace. No, you can use YAML. It's fine. I'll just think mean things about you. London lib. And then what did we call it? We said var equals, was it greeting? .hello. OK. I'm using Notepad 2. It's 1 better than Notepad. You should check it out. OK. And then I will say .NET run. OK. I blame you all for that. Because one of you, it's greetings. Thank you for helping people who thought that they were going to help me, but they didn't want to speak up because they're English. I'm picking on the English because there's this guy at work who does this impression of Hugh Grant entering a room that he shouldn't have. And all it is basically like, oh, I'm dreadfully sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here. And that's all I can think about. So I feel like someone wanted to help me, but they're like, oh, sorry. It's all right. Pardon me. Excuse me. So if you see a mistake, please help me. This is called mob programming, and I will very likely have a misplaced $1 million semicolon at some point. I could really use your help. OK, so in this point here, I've only got these two things. I could certainly go and make a solution. And I could go and add these projects to the solution. And I could say add LondonCon. And I could go and add London Live. It's going to take me a while to retrain myself. So now I've added those to this solution file. And I could say .NET build. And I can build all those things. So I'm doing all of this at the command line because when you go into Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Writer or whatever, these things are what's happening. This is what happens when you learn to drive a stick shift, and then you move to an automatic shift car. It's just nice to know what's happening underneath. So now I could go and say .NET New Razor London Web. .NET Run. Like I said, thank you. Too late, though. Try harder next time. Could have helped. Could have used your help a second ago. Thank you, though, for yelling. That was perfect. I need that. And then I'm going to go because I'm in DOS and I don't have Control-R and I'm not very clever. OK? And then we'll go and we'll say code dot, and we'll open up Visual Studio Code. And we'll take a look at one of these pages. This is a nice little web thing we're making here. And we'll say using London lib. I always forget if these are needed or not. I don't know. Some of those may be needed. I'm not sure. Greetings.hello. Are they needed? They are needed. What about colons? Are those allowed? I don't know. Is that right? You don't know? You're thinking it's going to break? No. You'd think it's good? No. You think it's bad? OK, if it breaks, it's on you. If it doesn't break, then I will raise my fist triumphantly. It's not going to work? There's no way? It'll work? Well, see, now you said it didn't work before. See, now it's not working for other reasons, though. What is it? Why is it bad?
It's not needed.
The using isn't needed?
The semicolon is needed.
Well, the semicolon is not needed. But it actually didn't work. Right? So there's other reasons that this is bad. Like not working is also part of it. What in the French hell? Outdated. This happened yesterday. Where's Damien and David? How did we figure this out? No, it's not that. So I'm on a daily build of a fork of a friend's cousin's build of a .NET Core 3. And what we're seeing is we switched everything to HTTPS by default. And we're having trouble with the switchover. So if you have like the wrong port and you're HTTPS and you go on this port, then things freak out. And Kestrel needs to basically upgrade everyone to here. So anyway, that worked. Thank you, though. Hello, NDC. So now I don't want your pity applause. It's like the happy parent. It's so cute to just watch, you know. It's like watching a three-legged dog, you know. He's going to get where he's going, but it's just sad to watch. Watching Scott do live coding is just, it's adorable, right? You know, he's just not a good ballet dancer, but he loves the sport so much. So I'm just going to jeter back over here and continue to fail on stage here. What's significant about this is the fact that if we go up to London lib and we look at that CS proj, what? And the best part is that because I'm so bad at programming that you don't know if it's a joke or not, right? It gives me plausible deniability. I just put in a couple of extra semicolons and some curly braces, and then you help me, and then you feel good about yourself, and then you don't know. I could be the best programmer ever. I could have been coasting on charm for 25 years, and you have no, it could be a little of both. We don't know, right? Now you're all wondering what the mystery is. Here is the London lib. It's a .NET standard library. That's significant. Notice that it doesn't say .NET Core, it doesn't say Mono, it doesn't say .NET Framework, it says .NET Standard. It's that agreement. It's an agreement of these are the APIs that everybody will be able to do. It's console.writeline, it's string.contains, it's all of those different things that one would want to do. And if you make your own .NET, if you fork .NET and build it for a processor that we haven't seen, you need to make that implementation a .NET Standard implementation, barring a few things that you might want to throw and say, well, you know, not implemented. Like if it doesn't have a screen, then you might not do bitmaps or whatever, right? If it doesn't have a file system, then you have a problem. If it doesn't do things in a certain way, then don't implement those pieces and throw not implemented. But for the most part, you want to have things be .NET Standard, okay? That .NET Standard thing is so important because it allows us to do crazy stuff. Now remember how we compiled C# to IL. The IL was the applesauce. And then we ran it. We ran it in Mono. We ran it in .NET. We ran it anywhere. We ran it on the web. We ran it in the command line. What other applesauce-style technologies are currently available? Well, it turns out that MScriptem, forget how to pronounce it. You can take a C application and then compile it to the applesauce of the web, which is WebAssembly. Right? It's this pre-chewed version of JavaScript that is easily digestible for babies and browsers. And I can take that C app and I can run it in the browser. Right? So I'll just fire up a little, what is that? .NET. That was kind of cool, actually. We should name it that. DOSNES. That's how it's pronounced. I'm going to say .NET Serve, which is a tiny little global tool that you can use if you need a web server, just like on the fly, just like, hey, give me a web server. And then I will go and say localhost 8080. And that's the little .NET web server that's sitting right there. And I'll visit this hello.html. And that's the C app running inside of this in the context of WebAssembly. So if I can compile C code in such a way, then where's some really convenient portable C code that one could go and do some damage with? Mono. So if you compiled Mono to WebAssembly, what kind of damage could you potentially do? You may have had the joy and the pleasure to see some of the work that Steve Sanderson, genius programmer, has been working on. And he gave a talk yesterday. And we'll say .NET New London Blaze. .NET New Blazor. I'm going to go down into here. And then I will say add a reference. Go open up code again. And I think we'll be in here. And we'll do a little of this, a little HTML, a little @ little greetings, a little hello, right? We'll say .NET Run. I'm wondering if I've left something on another port. Thinking about it, Something's happening. Then I'm going to open up competitive browser. And then I'm going to look at competitive browser and comment on the fact that I'm using Bing as my home page. I'm using this cool new feature. It's a Bing extension. It's a Chrome extension called Bing New Tab. It's really cool because when you hit Control-T, you get to see Bing. But then if you search for stuff, it uses Google. So that gives you the benefit of Bing and also the ability to find things on the internet. So there's that same exact .NET standard DLL showing up in this web app. Okay, so that's cool. So I'm going to hit F12, and then I will casually point out to some people who may not know that if you hit F12 in Chrome and you right-click on the refresh button, it gives you extra menu items that weren't there otherwise. What's cool about little tips like that, if you throw those into your talks, is every once in a while, someone will go, That happened yesterday at a talk that I was giving. It was like nobody cared, and you were all very quiet and polite, and nobody wanted to leave, and I was doing OK. And then I did that tip, and the person went, It was kind of a Grover, Sesame Street, Yoda kind of a thing. And that told me that that person had derived value from the talk. Nothing I had said up to that point was useful. I was literally compiling Mono into WebAssembly and running it in a browser and talking about nested virtual machines running in a compatible and open source way. But it was that right click that elicited a So if you feel the need to utter like Yoda, that would be just it makes me feel good about my job. All right. Now, I'm going to go and hit refresh, and I'm going to point to this. There's Mono. That's cool. Mono.wasm. And look. Look. Did we compile the London lib to WASM? Anyone saw that step? We did not. No, we just shipped it, the exact same one that I made. We shipped all the way to the browser. And it ran in here, thereby making the internet itself .NET Standard compliant. Seriously. You think I'm joking? No, you do. So that's interesting. That brings the idea of code reuse, real code reuse, to another level. Like if you've got a really awesome tested something, the potential for code reuse is really huge. What other kind of damage, I mean productivity, could one potentially do with that? What if I had like a Windows Forms application? Because people still make those. In fact, it's one of the #1 projects that people are making is Windows Forms. It's like the most common thing that people do because it's the fastest way to get a button on a page, right? It's true, man. That was the value right there. No, it really is. It's just buttons, right? Like I could just throw them onto the page. You know, if we added like a physics thing that would like give them a little bit of oomph and they'd have momentum, it would be really cool. So this is a Windows Forms memory game, like a kids matching game. And then was that the symbol of Chili's? Apparently they're going to sue us. And then, I'm not good at these games. This is Windows Forms. Now, Windows Forms typically needs .NET, the .NET Full Framework, the one that we're afraid to install, right? And you don't want to go and say, well, this customer has 4.6 and everything works, but in order to run my app, I need 4.7. So we took .NET Core 3 and did a brain transplant and put .NET Core underneath these legacy, but no longer legacy applications, so that I can just copy deploy and give you a folder with your own personal private version of .NET. Even with bug fixes, because WinForms and WPF are both open source, with takebacks. And then you might say, well, I don't want a 2 gig folder in order to run my matching game. Well, the matching game only needs certain parts, right? It only needs certain functions. Remember how I talked about the different .NETs? They have different innovations. There's some cool innovations that's happening in the Mono side with called tree trimming. What if you took your application and you hung it with all the dependencies down to the function level, and then you shook it, and the leaves of the functions that you don't use fell off. And you use one function in system.xml or one function in system.string. The other ones just aren't needed because they're not a part of the hot path, and they fall away. And you can get .NET down to 60 megs, 30 megs, little tiny .NETs. But that's not that interesting. This WinForms application that's running on .NET 3 uses logic that is written in a .NET Standard DLL. So what if I could go over here and run this application? Wondering again if I've left something on port 5000. What is that? Okay. That's that WinForms app running in the browser. Okay. Is it really? Or is it all lies? Microsoft with the $sign. No. That is the logic part, about 85 to 90% code reuse, with the part that painted having been simply swapped out for divs. Because before, the logic stuff was factored out, right? It's just talking to those controls, then a control hierarchy in WinForms. It can just as easily talk to a control hierarchy here. Now, I'm not promising 99% code reuse, but I am trying to show you what is possible. That's real. And that's cool. Now, I'm not saying that all of your incredibly well-factored legacy WinForms apps are going to... What I am saying is both of you that have well-factored WinForms apps have a bright future ahead of you. But that's not all. What else could we do potentially with that London lib? What else could we do that would be causing some damage? I brought this device with me. Let me see if I can bring up the camera and show you this. There's a bunch of cables and a bunch of stuff. Huh? Look, it's seeing my face and then also secondarily identifying my face here in the other face. You gotta, somebody tweet that because that's too cool. No pressure, my face hurts. All right, thank you. What I brought was this. I was stopped at the border, and that's fine. There were discussions. There was a conversation. It was awkward. But then I booted up Raspberry Pi on a tiny screen and told them it was made in London. Or close enough, right? This has got all kinds of widgets and cool, fun stuff, and it's actually powered by this petite little battery that I use to keep my iPhone running for more than an hour. So I'm running this entire box off of this. Now, what I've done, I'm going to put that down here, is I have made a new application called this. This is using the new system.devices.gpio, general purpose I/O, that is now built into .NET 3. We just shipped it in preview 2. So I can actually write C# code here to talk to the devices. In this case, the Raspberry Pi is wired up to an LCD display. Yeah. That's cool. Then I could shush over to that machine. I'm trying to make that a thing. We're shushing into machines now. Do you think we can make that happen? You're not excited about that? I just want you to throw it out casually at work. Yeah, could you just shush into that, that machine over there? No? Yeah, try it out. But say it casually. You don't want to throw it down their throats. You want them to feel like it's a thing that they didn't know about. That all these years, people have been shushing into computers, and they've been saying it wrong. You follow why that's important? Please try to make that happen. Only for people who haven't actually been to this talk. We want to just shame the people who are at work right now and who didn't come to NDC, because those people suck. So I can go and run that, and then, because I can't, can I do a camera? Let's do the camera again. Do this. And that's cool. But then I thought to myself, that was too hard. That was a lot of shushing. And what I really want to do is I want to do things like be able to write the code on Windows, set a breakpoint on Windows, build it here, press F5, have it automatically publish a copy of .NET via SCP or secure copy over to the Pi, then attach to a remote instance of an ARM build of the Visual Studio debugger, and drop into a breakpoint. Pause for effect, right there. So now I am cross-debugging between this x64 machine and this ARM machine with .NET Core 3 and Visual Studio Code. And what's interesting about this is that I haven't paid Microsoft anything. That's cool. It's open source all the way down to the metal. I can even see local variables, step over, and all that stuff. OK? But since that didn't cause you to applaud, and I don't want your pity, so don't start now, I thought to myself, that's fun. That will make my IoT projects more cool, and I don't have to learn other languages because I'm a C# elitist. And, but this is a lot to say hello world. This is a microcomputer. This is running Raspbian, a full instance of Linux. If I ran top, you'd see like 19 things running. There's cron jobs. It's a little overkill for production. But at the same time, you see that I even had to do the build here. Like I could build it on the Raspberry Pi, but it might take a long time. I don't want to wait 10 minutes. What is something that is smaller than a microcomputer? Well, something that is smaller is a microcontroller. But that would be insane, because you can't run .NET and jitters and all the stuff that is the .NET of it all on something that is like the size of a Tic Tac. Do you have Tic Tacs here? Right, little like a Tic Tac box. Maybe not an actual Tic Tac, because then you'd actually swallow .NET, and that'd be like a whole thing. But like a Tic Tac box, okay? So what I did is I talked to our friends at Wilderness Labs. Wilderness Labs is doing a Kickstarter, and what they've done is pretty bananas. Let me bring a camera up over here, and then I'm going to do a handheld in a second. Wilderness Labs gave me one of 4 pre-production Meadow devices. This is an alpha of an alpha. They made 4 of these. They're going to do. They've had a successful Kickstarter. You can buy these. Go to wildernesslabs.co. Sign up for their mailing list. I have no relationship with the company other than they loaned me this. Okay? But this is the power of .NET. This is the development board. The actual board will be like, well, I'm not trying to flip off an entire crowd, but let's just say it's middle finger sized, right? These bits will go. Then I've taken the same LCD and wired it up. Now, I'm not, I took electrical engineering, but I'm also colorblind, so these are all different. But only to me. I'm told that wiring diagrams are easier when it's got multiple colors. So I put a splash of blue here, okay? So this device right here is not a microcomputer. It doesn't run a full operating system. It runs a micro operating system. It runs NUTX, N-U-T-T-X, an open source operating system with like a 1 megabyte footprint. And I can't like plug it in and have it look like a disk. So in fact, I have to flash the firmware of the entire thing with this device, an STLink. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to this Macintosh here that I've set up for this reason. I'm also going to grab my power off of this and plug it in over here. Now, in the future, I'm told by the friends at Meadow that this will be an F5 plug it in, automatically kind of like work with Visual Studio. But again, as an alpha, it is what it is, and I think it's pretty impressive. So let's plug into our Mac, and let's bring that up on the big screen. Okay, there's a Mac looking Mac-ish. Let me go into Visual Studio right here. So this is Visual Studio for Mac, and what I'm doing here is making a .NET DLL that uses .NET standard DLLs. We're literally talking about a .NET standard microcontroller platform. How would that be possible? You think about all the overhead of jitters and stuff like that. Remember what I said before at the beginning of the talk, how exciting it was that we have multiple .NETs and the different pieces of innovation that are now coming together because all the .NETs are under one roof. You've got cool stuff happening in the just-in-time or jitter, just-in-time compilation. You have cool stuff happening in the ahead-of-time compilation to compile .NET all the way down to Apple Juice. And then you have cool things happening in the interpretation space. If you take a look at a really great application on the iPad called Continuous Codes, continuous.codes, it is Visual Studio for the iPad, effectively. It's an IDE for typing in the iPad. But of course, iPads and iOS don't allow jitting and arbitrary running of code. What they did is Frank, who wrote it, took the Roslyn interpreter and runs the interpreter on the iPad. So with a microcontroller, what you could do is JIT some of it, interpret some of it, ahead of time compile some of it, and have all of those contexts flow between, and you get best-in-class performance and battery life in the order of weeks, as opposed to in the order of hours with something like a Raspberry Pi. So here I'm going to do things like talk to the digital port, talk to the LCD, and toggle some LEDs and say hello, NDC. Now, today, in order to do that, it's a little bit more complicated. I just got to run out to the terminal here. But again, this will be easy in the future, I'm told. And I'm going to go and say, run STUtil. So I've just fired up GDB, a GNU debugger, listening on port 4242. And then over here, I'm going to run it and then say remote target 4242. And then we are now flashing the firmware. You see the dots? We're flashing the firmware, and the microcontroller will effectively boot into .NET. OK? Now, in order to show that to you, I'm going to do this clever hack that my buddy backstage suggested, which is to go into my phone. And I'm going to put the phone on the HDMI. OK, pop that up there, sir. OK. So we're thinking, we're looking at dots. Things are flashing. Screens are screening. These wires are gray, which was interesting because I brought them all the way here. Hopefully one of the wires did not move, or somebody moved it as a goof. OK, it's resetting. And now it's going to boot into MS Core Lib. I want to say big thanks to Brian Kostanich and our friends at Wilderness Labs. This is called the Meadow device. It is right now, he's working on getting his Kickstarter out. Let's go ahead and switch over to the Windows machine. He's working on getting his Kickstarter out, and then you'll be able to get those soon. Now, what's interesting about all of this, and why I think it is a great piece of punctuation for Microsoft's open source journey, go ahead and heat up the Windows machine there, sir, in the back, is this idea that that Windows Forms developer, that person that's been writing C# or VB for 10 years and maybe thinking, I did this, I see all the new stuff happening, but it's not for me. I'm saying it is for you. It is absolutely for you. And what's exciting about that is it's for you because you know C#, you know the language, you know the base class library, which is effectively the .NET standard. System.string, system.file, all the things you do every day in WinForms or in WebForms or in MVC, you just became a cloud developer, a container developer, a Kubernetes developer, an iPhone developer, an Android developer, a Raspberry Pi, or even microcontroller developer. That's really exciting to me. Now, I believe in people being polyglots, so certainly having this support in VB and F# and C# and other languages is super interesting, and that's what makes that intermediate language so interesting, and the idea that if I produce a .NET standard DLL that is smart about when it touches the metal and which parts of the metal it is judicious about. For example, you saw me talking to system.device.gpio. There isn't that on Windows, unless you're running that exact same sample on Windows IoT Core, and then it would work. that nice? So you have those drivers that do the appropriate call down to the metal. So that is my talk. That's some of the cool stuff that's being worked on right now at Microsoft, outside Microsoft. There's also things like HAST layer, H-A-S-T layer, which is compiling .NET to FPGA chips. There's really cool stuff that's happening, and none of it would have been possible if we hadn't just opened it all up all the way down to the metal. So thank you very much for spending time with me this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful NDC. And you can check me out also at 2 o'clock, where I'm going to be talking about my open source artificial pancreas. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I've got IoT devices plugged into me, and I'm going to talk about how we solve diabetes problems with open source and open source hardware. Thank you very much.